Welcome to a Season of Caring podcast, where there's hope for living, loving, and caring with no regrets. This is Rayna Neises, your host, and today I have Diane Clark. Diane has been married for 48 years. She and her husband have 2 wonderful sons, 2 gorgeous daughter-in-laws, and 3 near-perfect grandchildren. And of course, a perfect West Highland Terrier, Lulu. She has served in various positions in the church for over 20 years, where she's honed her gifts of serving and administration. She has a servant's heart that has at times coaxed her into overextending herself. But she counts it one of her greatest privileges to be at the bedside of a friend dying of AIDS contracted from a blood transfusion, of her mother-in-law, who was her best friend, and of her 2 precious fathers as they entered into eternity. She feels that those moments are as miraculous as seeing the birth of a baby, and perhaps as painful as birthing en naturel. She loves being a mom and grandmother and considers it an honor to have friends and to be a friend. She likes cooking, enjoys new foods and places, but most of all, she loves Jesus and living sacrificially for him. Welcome, Diane. It's wonderful to have you today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
So let's just start off by having you share with the listeners about your caregiving experience. It's a little unique. I haven't run into others that have quite the same stories.
Right. Yes. My husband and I decided years ago, actually, that we would care for our parents until they're homegoing. And it just so happened that both of our fathers needed end-of-life care at the same time. They were both in their late 80s. They were living in an independent living facility. Neither of them were happy at that facility. And we asked them what city would they like to move to if they had their choice. They both said Huntsville. And so I began looking for opportunities for us to move. We did make that move fairly quickly. And we're able to have them live with us, my father for the next 2.5 years and my father-in-law for little over 5 years.
Wow. So having that brand new family, bringing those gentlemen in and you and your husband creating a brand new space together, I'm sure you had quite the adventure in caring for them. So there weren't necessarily health issues that prompted the move. They were just unhappy.
Yeah, there were actually more health issues concerning my father-in-law. We thought he'd had a stroke, and we thought we need to move up our plan. My father would have been fine where he was. He's very social, loved being around people, loved talking about Jesus. But we actually made the move more for my father-in-law. What we found once we got him to Huntsville was that he had developed a dependency on Valium that he had been on for his nervous system for probably 40 years. Mm-hmm. He had not had a stroke. As he would take smaller dosages of the Valium, he would begin to have symptoms. And he thought it was just, he didn't relate it, nor did any of his doctors relate it to a Valium addiction. So it was more for him than for my daddy that we moved and moved them in with us. But then the doctor that we saw very quickly identified the addiction and his symptoms. And he said, your father-in-law's not had a stroke, and we're going to get him off this Valium and he's going to be a different person. And he was.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing what the right doctor can do for you. Yes, definitely.
Absolutely. He was a godsend for sure.
Tell us a little bit about the support that you had with friends and family. Since you moved, that might have been a little bit more challenging.
It was. We both had grown up in Huntsville, so we had some friends, but it's that old saying, you can never move back home. We found to be true because so many people had moved away. So we really didn't have a base of friends there. However, we had our family. Our children were 100% supportive. Our grandkids, they absolutely just loved their pawpaw and their pops, and they were the greatest support that we had. Our son and daughter-in-law and our youngest grandson lived in Huntsville, so we had immediate access to them, and they were able to step in frequently and help us out in tight spots.
Well, I know in my caregiving experience, my sister's children, there's just such joy kids bring. And
Oh,
especially with watching elderly with the kids, it's just so much fun.
yeah, I have to share one quick story. We were moving into the house that we had found that was absolutely perfect. Their end of the house was more private. Our bedroom and all was upstairs. So we were getting them moved in. My youngest grandson was, only 3 at the time, 2 or 3 at the time. And my daddy was coming from the back, sort of looking at his room. Our grandson ran to him on his own because normally it would take a little coaxing, ran to him on his own, knocked him back into the stairs, cut his arm, because
Oh,
our skin is a little bit, thin when we're in our 80s and 90s. My daddy said, honey, I don't care. He's the first time he's ever run to me. I don't mind
oh,
at all.
so sweet. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's nothing like the support of family, though. They give
Yeah.
so much, the people we care for, but they give us a lot too emotionally whenever they're really
Exactly.
understanding and willing to step into it with us. So that was a blessing.
Exactly. And yeah, and not just to be supportive, even if it was just a phone call. How you
Mhm.
doing? How they doing? Can I talk to them? He gave me a few minutes to do something else. And so, especially at the beginning, because their minds were a little keener when we first began than when at the end of their lives.
So, not just the support of friends and family, though, you also were smart enough to go ahead and look for outside help. So, tell us a little bit
Yes.
about that.
Yes, we could not have made it without. In Huntsville, it was called Senior Helpers. They came out several times a week, really depending on our need. The beginning, I only started off with 1 day a week just because my father in law, especially, had a little difficulty with strangers. And
Mhm.
so we started off with just 1 day a week at only 2 hours. And honestly, I would just get out and drive.
Mm.
Wherever it took me for an hour, I would drive and I would pray and I would cry. And every now and then I would scream and, and then turn around and come back. I didn't really have anything specific in mind. I just needed to be away. And we increased it as we saw the need. So we went from 1 to, at some point, 3 times a week, sometimes even a larger span of time for 4 hours. Even there was an occasion when we had to be out of town, so we were gone all day long. But they were a very wonderful group of ladies and gentlemen who stepped in to help us when we needed them.
So wise to bring in help. I think that's one of the things that's hardest for us to do in that season is to realize that we don't have to
Yeah,
do it all, and
right.
being willing to ask for help with those that we love and our family, our friends, but then to just say sometimes the outside help can be irreplaceable as well.
Right. Yeah, I will say that toward the end of my father in law's life, I decreased that time away from him because he seemed to get more confused and less content with having others in the home. He was a little bit more paranoid and just uncomfortable. And so I did spend more time, one on one time with him toward the end of his life, but I don't regret it.
And that can be hard because they do want to have a say and they definitely
Yeah.
love us and want us around and not necessarily
Yeah.
anyone else. But I think sometimes approaching it as a team and just saying, hey, I really need to do this, they want
Yeah.
you to be okay too. And so when they can,
Exactly.
you realize that it's a need, it's not just, it'd be nice to go
Right.
and do
Right.
something on
And
your
I
own.
did
So,
I did take opportunity. It just wasn't as frequent and I tried not to be gone as long. And it really didn't matter how long I was gone. He was always so, like, if I left him for the weekend, or my husband was gracious enough to stay with them and with his dad the last week of the year, every year that we did this, so that I could go with the children to the beach. But he would always act like, oh, I'm so glad you're back. We missed you so much.
Well, that was sweet. That was sweet to hear that. So,
Yeah.
but in the midst of it, it can be a lot. And
Yeah.
oftentimes we want to say, I quit. If I just knew where to turn in my resignation letter, right? So what did you do when you
Yeah.
reached those points that you really just wanted to resign?
Yeah. There were a couple of times that in tears, I would say in a hushed voice, I need to stop this. It's just wearing on me emotionally. And my sister died of early onset Alzheimer's. This is before she became ill. When I was caring for my mother-in-law. She said, when I called her and I said, I can't do this anymore. She's going downhill. I don't like watching her lose her abilities, and it's too painful. And my sister wisely said, who else will do this? Who else will care for your mom? And you have to. You have to buck up. I didn't have my sister to tell me that this time, but I remembered her words. And it was just an opportunity to share with my husband the burden I felt. He was away at work all day, so he would come in and sit with them, watch TV with them, or just sit with them and give me a little break. But there was still, sometimes it just mounted up.
Mhm.
I didn't realize sometimes how quickly it mounted up, that I don't want to. It wasn't so much that I couldn't, I didn't want to.
Well, I think that's an honest statement. There are times that you just don't want to do it. Some of the
Yeah.
tasks are not fun. Many of them are not fun. There were things, I'll never forget when my dad was having not regular bowel movements and made the phone call to the doctor, and she's like, okay, so this is what you need to do. And I'm like, don't nurses do that? Don't you go somewhere and let other people take care of those things? But
Right.
so much more
Right.
of it is on our shoulders as caregivers nowadays. And so there
Right.
are those moments when you just think, no, I don't want to do this.
Right.
Like you said, knowing even when we find ourselves at a place that we can't take care of all of their physical needs, things
Right.
progress within their disease or whatever, even having them somewhere else, you're still so engaged. There's so much that they need from you that it really isn't about doing all the hands on yourself. It's about being
Right.
there and knowing they're okay and supporting them and having that conversation
Right.
and having the whole picture. Each person who comes and goes only knows what they experienced in that moment. So being able to be that person who
Exactly.
gets it all and puts all those pieces together is so
Yeah.
invaluable.
Right. Yeah, my husband and his dad did not have the best of relationships. But the last week of my father-in-law's life, my husband really stepped up. He could see that his dad would not live much longer. And he was there with me day in, day out, through the night sometimes, and had never, always sort of stood back while I did the toiletry things or toileting. And then at that point, when he saw how weak his dad was, really stepped up. But I told him later, I said, that's really the Lord's payback, because you didn't really help me that much when the boys were little. So not my planning. I'm just saying.
Precious times and great memories. Like you said, it's very bonding to be able to
Yes,
just come alongside and do for them what they can't do for themselves.
absolutely. There is no, in my mind, there's nothing greater. There was no other choice for me except to do this. It's what I call the hardest right thing I've ever done. And I have a cousin who also cared for her mom, but she said, hard things sometimes people shy away from, but it really builds your character. It has a great impact on your life, probably more so than we think. Like I described in my bio, the birth of a baby and the death of a loved one where you're able to be right there with them, there's just nothing more beautiful in my eyes.
It's amazing that you had them together. I would imagine there were a lot of blessings with being together and that they had each other to kind of lean on in that just difficult
Right.
aging. Aging's just not easy. And so they had somebody
No.
else that really got it. At the same time, that's twice of them to keep track of. So
Yeah.
that's a lot,
Right.
but what a blessing to be able to be there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they became my father, he was very social. My father in law, not so much. But after my daddy died, my father in law said, I really miss your dad.
Mhm.
And he was probably my best friend,
Oh,
even though you would have never known that while daddy was still alive. But it was, you know, a needful for me. I needed to hear that. Daddy would have
mhm,
loved to have heard that, but I
mhm,
needed to hear that my daddy made an impact on him.
mhm.
And he was very appreciative, even though he didn't show it like my daddy did. He
Mm.
was, he did tell me one time, I think I love you more than I loved Mary Beth, which was his wife, my mother-in-law.
Oh, wow. That's
Oh,
sweet.
yeah,
Yeah, it's hard. It's not every personality is so different. And that's one thing in
exactly.
caring, you have to really consider who you're caring for, because
Absolutely.
if we expect them to behave the way someone else behaves, or we're not changing them, we know
Mm-mm.
that. So we have to just take what we get, but it helps to understand them better so that we can
Exactly,
realize.
exactly. And I did do a lot of reading, Rayna. The senior helpers did give me a lot of material. I did go to a support group once a month. It
Mm,
wasn't altogether that helpful, but they did give out a lot of information that I was able to read. So I was very equipped, I think, on what was coming, what dementia looks like, especially having been around my sister so much in her declining days and weeks and months. I wasn't there with her every day, but when I was, I could see what that looked like. And that helped a lot.
mhm. I do think that that's one of the great values of support groups, not only just that great information that they give you, but there are others who have been on the journey and they're at a different place that
Hmm.
can help you
Exactly.
realize what's coming in a way that's not super
Hmm.
scary, but at the same time, just to encourage you that
Right.
there's life beyond it too, because sometimes it feels so overwhelming that it doesn't even feel
Right.
like you're going to make it on the other side.
Exactly. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, how did you take care of you during this time of caring for the gents?
Right. Yes. Well, I'll have to be honest. I didn't do a great job of doing that. I put off a lot of doctor's appointments. When they came up, I would say, "Oh, I'm really doing fine. I'll just make one later." And never get around to it. But I wish I had done a better job, but to be honest, I did not take good care of me. I was I was given advice to do that by all kind of people. Are you, taking care of your, oh yeah, I am. All the while knowing that I wasn't. And there were consequences for that. Some of which have gone away, but others I'm still dealing with them. But I wish I had listened more to other people trying to help. You need to take more time away on a regular basis. And that's just something that you look in hindsight and say, yeah, probably should have done a better job with that.
It's funny because Allie, my co-host, and I, we frequently say the same thing over and over again, as far as take care of you and take care of you and take care of you. And we were talking the other day, like, do you feel like a broken record sometimes? She's like, yes, but it's because it's so important. So listeners, we're going to
Yeah,
say it again. Do
yeah,
it. Figure
exactly.
out
Do
what you
it.
need. Yeah.
Do it. Yeah. And do it on a regular basis. I think you and I were chatting before when they had an appointment. I should have then made an appointment for that and kept it instead of letting other things convince me that it would be okay later on. So that would have been good to hear. I don't know that I'd listen to it, but it would have been good to hear.
And that's the hard part, is how to get people to really know we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But in the trenches, it feels like you just don't need to worry about it. It feels like it's not that important.
Right. Right. And, to be painfully honest, I think I needed to be needed during this process. And I overlooked a lot of things in myself just because that came to the surface, while I was caring. And I've since discovered that that's not the case. I don't need to be needed. I needed to care for them, but I didn't absolutely need to be needed. They needed me for sure.
Right. Yeah.
So
and they needed help. It just comes back to not all of it has to be you.
Correct.
And that's a hard line to see in the midst of it. So
it is.
And especially when they're telling you they don't want someone else.
Right. And my daddy was just the opposite of my father-in-law. Honey, go. My father-in-law was, when will you be back? He was an engineer, a NASA engineer. So, punctuality and knowing what the schedule is was very important to him. And consistency. He just kind of wanted the same person all the time. It just gave him comfort. So I probably should have had my husband step in and say, Dad, let's give her a break. And he did. It just wasn't probably as frequent as I needed.
And it's hard to know in the moment, I think, sometimes how frequently you need it. I found when I got away, I could feel the difference. But if you don't get away enough, you don't feel the difference.
Yeah. You don't feel it until you get back. And you're like, oh, wow. Back in the thick of it again.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right. I think if I had done it more frequently, I would have felt refreshed more often, instead of struggled with depression. Just I'm like my daddy, just very social, and I love to serve. And even though I love to serve them, there were others that I wanted to serve. I wanted to do it in, a different way. And the Lord very obviously had this amount of time blocked off for me to serve them wholly and completely. And I would not change anything. I would do things differently, do some things differently. But as far as doing it again, I would do it in a heartbeat again. It was absolutely the hardest right thing I've ever done.
I love that. And that's what it's all about, is offering you, the listeners, that hope that what you are doing right now is irreplaceable. It's valuable beyond your understanding in the moment. And it is just as hard as we know it is, as hard as you feel like it is. But be encouraged that when you look back, you would do it again. You don't have to have regrets that you didn't do what needed to be done. And you don't have to have regrets that you did more than you should have done. So be intentional and think through it and really invest where you are right now, because it is just a season. And I think that's also encouraging when you're in the middle of it, to know it doesn't feel like it's ever going to come to an end, but it does come to an end.
Yeah, and you feel badly about thinking that. I can remember lying in bed thinking that and thinking, oh, I shouldn't even think that. That's horrible. But it's just a fact. It didn't go on forever, especially towards the end. My father was only ill actually 4 days before he went home to the Lord.
Oh, wow.
My father-in-law it was a lot longer. That sounds bad to use that word. It took longer for him, but it is a process. Death is a process. And if you can separate the emotion behind it and realize all of these things that's happening to their body that they're just not liking at all. Nobody said this is a period in life where you're just gonna love it. It's difficult for them, especially for men. I'm sure it is difficult as well for women, but I've only, I cared for both of them, and this is fresher in my mind. It was so difficult. My daddy would say some days when he couldn't recall things, honey, am I going stupid on you? Because I know. I'd say, no, Daddy, I can't remember half the things you remember, but aging is not easy.
It is not.
And letting go of this life is all we know, but it is a part of life, just as birth is. And it is a beautiful part of life. And it was a beautiful thing to care for these 2 World War II veterans. I would have crossed the oceans to be able to do that for them, because they had served me as a child, but also served in the military. And I had great respect for both of them.
Well, Diane, it's been wonderful to talk with you and just to reinforce one more time those important things about caregiving.
Yes.
And I love you saying it's the hardest right thing, because it's so true. And sometimes we think hard means it's not the right thing, but that's not true. It is hard is where we're supposed to be at times of hard things.
Sure.
So,
Absolutely.
well, thank you so much for your wisdom and visiting today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rayna.
Just a reminder, listeners, A Season of Caring podcast is created for the encouragement of family caregivers. If you have medical, financial, or legal questions, please contact your local professionals and take heart in your season of caring.